Well, for months, Channel 4's I-Team has been looking into the man who allegedly is the #1 underworld figure in Boston. In the upcoming report, you'll hear what a hired killer, now deceased, had to say about Angiulo. Here with details, I-Team reporter Joe Bergantino. Joe?
Well, Jack, that hired killer was Joseph Barboza Barron. Over the years, he played a crucial role in feeding information to authorities about Jerry Angiulo and the mob. The story of Jerry Angiulo and the story of organized crime in Boston begins in the bloody 1960s.
Boston during the 1960s. It was the scene of an all-out gang war, a decade of violence. Joseph Lanzi was a victim, executed in Medford in 1967 gangland style, a bullet to the head. Lanzi was only one of 50 men brazenly shot down as gangsters fought it out in the streets.
When an underworld killer remains brazen and gets careless, innocent people are going to get hurt.
In 1967, John Henning was a reporter covering the story of the gang wars.
I've never seen a period in the city since I've been here where there were so many open gangland shootings, out-and-out warfare.
The battle was over territory. To the survivors went a multi-million-dollar network of illegal businesses and control over Boston's loan sharking and gambling operations. Senator McClellan. Congress identified the winners during a series of hearings in 1963. Entered into the record the names and faces of New England's mobsters. From Rhode Island, Raymond Patriarca, the father and boss of the family, and Gennaro Angiulo, the #2 man and Boston's godfather. A bigger story shook the mob in 1972. That's when a convicted killer and admitted hitman started testifying before Congress and to the police. His name, Joseph Barboza Barron. The mob had placed a contract out on Barron's life. Then and only then, he broke the secret code of the mafia and told everything he knew.
According to Barron, the woods out here in Billrica are an unmarked graveyard filled with the bodies of gang members who disappeared several years ago. In a tape-recorded conversation with police back in 1971, Barron talked about contract killings ordered by mob leaders, and now the I-Team has obtained that secret tape-recorded conversation, the full contents of which has never before been revealed.
What you will hear next is the tape recording of Barron talking to police about the mob and the areas they control. Barron says the power of the bosses extends throughout Massachusetts.
But main control is in Boston, East Boston, South End, Roxbury, you guys know, Quincy, Linden, North End, West End, Dorchester, Jamaica Plain, New Bedford, Hyde Park, Chelsea, Evans, South Boston, Dedham, Charlestown, Cambridge, Somerville, Mattapan, Medford. And all of these towns own bars and taverns, chartered clubs.
According to Barron, the man who controls this empire of illegal activities is Gennaro J. Angiulo. Angiulo answers only to Raymond Patriarca in Providence. In Barron's talks with the cops, he said Angiulo pays big money to Patriarca for the right to run Angiulo's criminal empire in Boston. In 1972, Barron told Congress even more.
Jerry Angiulo has over $1.5 million out in the street in Shylock at 1%. This is $10 a thousand. He makes $250,000 a week.
$250,000 a week, and that was 11 years ago. But today, here in Boston, no one is talking about how much money Jerry Angiulo makes. In fact, no one in law enforcement will talk on camera about anything. They say it might jeopardize their investigation. But privately, police sources tell us Angiulo built his reputation in the mafia by making money for the mob.
This is what he has to show for it. A $300,000 mansion overlooking the ocean in Nahant. A few steps away, a private beach. Swing sets and children's toys are all around. Parked in front of the house is a fleet of cars. The car Angiulo drives, surprisingly, a modest AMC Pacer with his name on the vanity plate. Angiulo and his brothers operate 2 businesses out of this office on Prince Street in the north end of Boston. One is called Huntington Realty Trust. The I-Team has learned through real estate records that this company has loaned more than $250,000 to men police say are organized crime figures. This storefront is also the home of Angiulo's second business, Federal Investments. It's a partnership that owns extensive property, like this building on Canal Street. Sandwiched in between other buildings, this property is not extravagant. It's nothing special.
This building here in the North End is typical of most of the buildings Angiulo's company owns. No one building is worth very much, but taken together, their values add up. In fact, Joseph Barron once told police Angiulo sunk $10 million into real estate. Today, police don't know whether he did or not, but they'd like to know, because they can seize that property if they can prove it was purchased with money obtained illegally.
Jerry Angiulo is a man described as a powerful gangster. That's ironic when you learn what he wanted to be. You're looking at his high school yearbook picture. He studied at the prestigious Boston English High School. Back then, his goal was to become a criminal attorney, but he never did. Instead, he found himself on the wrong side of the courts. His first arrests were for gambling, later for beating up a Treasury agent, and then assault on a Coast Guardsman. In 1967, he was accused of ordering the murder of former boxer Rocco DeSiglio. DeSiglio had the audacity to hold up a floating dice game. He thought he could get away with it. 3 days later, he was found beaten and shot to death. Angiulo was brought to trial. After 8 days, the jury found Angiulo innocent. Since then, Angiulo has kept a low profile. But on some evenings, he can be found at Francesco's restaurant in the North End. That's Jerry Angiulo talking with a group of men on the street corner near Francesco's. Angiulo standing on the left. After that conversation, he went inside for his traditional Italian meal.
Around 9 o'clock, the back room here at Francesco's is cleared out and a white tablecloth is set with silver and china. Jerry Angiulo walks in and takes his place at the head of the table. Several men join him for dinner and offer him a toast. It's like a scene right out of the movies. From the outside looking in, it appears to be a group of gentle old men just sitting down for a casual dinner. None of them threatening. But in the eyes of former U.S. Attorney Ted Harrington, these men are dangerous.
It's very difficult to inculcate or instruct people why they should be against organized crime, because as they say, this bet doesn't hurt anybody. This bet ultimately means the bribe and the bullet.
It was the bullet that brought a bloody end to the life of Joseph Barboza Barron. On February 11, 1976, Barron was gunned down in the streets of San Francisco. He was murdered for squealing.
Among the charges in the indictment against Jerry Angiulo is that he conspired with others to murder Joseph Barboza Barron. Tonight, a lot of people are wondering whether this indictment, unlike past indictments, will put an end to Angiulo's organization.
Tom Ellis and Robin Young.
He's the reputed head of organized crime in Boston, and tonight he's under arrest. The U.S. government says 64-year-old Gennaro Angiulo is the leader of a mob family involved in corruption, gambling, loan sharking, and murder. And 5 other people also are charged tonight, including 3 of Angiulo's brothers. Good evening, everybody. The arrest of what the Justice Department calls Boston's leading crime family and 2 of its top lieutenants. Top News 7 this evening. News 7's Ron Sanders is live now at the federal courthouse in Boston, where those 6 suspects are right now. Ron?
Well, Tom, we have some lead information, and I'll pass it along to you. We have information on bail that was set for the defendants. We'll run through it quickly, and then we'll tell you more about each of the defendants. Jerry Angiulo, no bail. Ilario Zannino is being held also, no bail. Donato Angiulo, $1 million bail, as well as Francesco Angiulo, who is being held on $1 million bail. Michael Angiulo, $500,000 bail, and Samuel Granito, $750,000 bail. The Angiulos and 2 of their associates were arrested in a federal strike force sweep by more than 40 FBI agents that took less than a half hour last night. This is the climax of a 3-year investigation.
Gennaro Jerry Angiulo is identified by the government as the underboss, or second in command, of the Patriarca family in New England, the mob's top man in Boston. Francesco Frankie Angiulo was arrested along with his brother at Francesco's restaurant in the North End. Donato Danny Angiulo of Medford, Samuel Granito of Revere, and Ilario Zannino, also known as Larry Bayonne of Swampscott, are called capo regimes, or lieutenants. Mikey Angiulo was also charged in the racketeering enterprise. The Justice Department calls that enterprise La Cosa Nostra, the Mafia. Flanked by U.S. Attorney William Weld and FBI Special Agent James Greenleaf, Jerry O'Sullivan, chief of the New England Organized Crime Strike Force, talked about the charges.
Multiple acts of murder in violation of the laws of Massachusetts and California, and acts indictable under various federal statutes, including illegal gambling businesses, illegal loan sharking businesses, obstruction of state and local law enforcement, interstate travel to aid their gambling businesses, and threatening various witnesses before the grand jury.
Defendant Ilario Zannino was arrested at Lynn Hospital, where he was being checked for a heart condition. The rest of the defendants appeared in federal court for their bail hearing. Jerry Angiulo spiced things up with loud remarks to the strike force chief. Angiulo used an Italian phrase which he said means good luck. To me, not you. The racketeering with which the defendants are charged allegedly took place between 1966 and 1982. A Boston police sergeant and a former court official are mentioned in the indictments but not identified.
Nicolo Nick Angiulo is called the family's consigliere, or counselor, but he is not under indictment. The federal officials declined to discuss impact of these indictments except to say that the people arrested are key management in the enterprise. Repeating again, the bail was just set for these defendants in the federal courthouse here. The defendants are still inside the courthouse. Jerry Angiulo is being held on no bail. Larry Zanino, no bail. Donato Angiulo, $1 million. Francesco Angiulo, $1 million. Michael Angiulo, $500,000. And Samuel Granito, $750,000. These defendants could receive 20-year jail terms if convicted and $25,000 fines plus the seizure of some property. That's the very latest from the federal courthouse in downtown Boston. I'm Ron Sanders. Back to Tom and Robin.
Thank you for that report, Ron. Now, the bombshell indictment stemmed from a massive investigation under RICO, which stands for Racketeer Influenced Corrupt Organizations.
And Tom, this is the most powerful tool ever designed to fight the mob. And News 7's Mike Taibbi, who's been following this story for months now, explains how murder and money are involved.
For RICO to work in Boston, it was going to have to work in the North End, arguably the most intimate and festive and old-world ethnic neighborhood in the city. The North End has also been identified since the early 60s as the roost from which the family of Gennaro Jerry Angiulo has controlled organized crime in Greater Boston. Controlled it from the office behind this neglected storefront on Prince Street.
Just get out of here. What do you want?
My business.
We got nothing to talk to you. Nothing to talk to you about.
I didn't ask you any questions.
You already been around trying to ask some questions.
I didn't ask anybody any questions. The family members don't like it when you poke around their turf, but they like it even less that the organized crime strike force has made them the targets of the most ambitious and sophisticated mob probe ever undertaken in Boston. It's one of a half-dozen similar RICO investigations just completed or underway, aimed at major mob families across the country. Notre Dame law professor Robert Blakey authored RICO in 1970.
The design of this statute back in 1970 was for precisely these kinds of prosecutions. And I wish they had come earlier, but I'm glad to see them today. In fact, RICO has come of age in the organized crime area.
I'm not going to answer another question. You just says I'm not under arrest and I'm going to walk out.
Just a minute, Mr. Wolf. Just a minute, Mr. Costello.
You don't mean that. In the early 50s, mobsters like Frank Costello had to be literally dragged in to appear before Senate committees trying to understand what would later become known as organized crime. But the picture that emerged for the American television public was shocking. Here were criminals connected by a nationwide syndicate. Here were government officials and cops corrupted by the mob. Here were gun malls testifying reluctantly to the lavish fruits of life in the underworld.
And years I've been going to Mexico. I went with fellas down there, and like a lot of girls, that they've given me things and bought me everything I want. Then when I was with Ben, he paid for everything.
By Ben, you mean Ben Siegel?
Yes. And he gave me some money, too, and bought me a house in Florida.
By the time the words mafia and Cosa Nostra became catchwords, there was a general public perception, in Boston too, that the mob was huge. It was everywhere. Its trademark was murder. It was nearly untouchable. So how could the government fight the mob? Well, the FBI has always used minor informants and conventional street work to attack the mob by going after gambling revenues. Every now and then they'd even pinch a big name like Ilario Zanino, also known as Larry Bioni, a big name who would usually stay out of jail. In the 60s, the feds turned the occasional highly placed soldier into a star witness. Big Vinnie Teresa and killer Joe Barboza Barron were the star songbirds in Boston. But RICO changed the ballgame. New definitions of racketeering activity and broad powers to wiretap gave the FBI the needed tools. If the offices of people like Jerry Angiulo could only be bugged, powerful cases could be built on the harvest of the wiretaps alone.
There's a common misapprehension. That is that wiretapping or bugging makes a cop's job easier. All he has to do is put a wire in and lay back and listen. It's not true. It's an enormous consumption of personnel. It's possible, but it's difficult.
But in January of 1981, a squad of FBI undercover men did the impossible, or what was thought to be the impossible. They gained surreptitious entry to Angiulo's Prince Street offices and planted hid two wireless microphones. It would take a squad of 12 men to monitor for 24 hours a day the extraordinary conversations that would follow for the next 4 months. The agents even had an ingenious method of confirming who was present during conversations at the office. Hidden cameras watched and photographed from the headlights of cars parked on cramped Prince Street, cars which were changed every night or so. And what do the microphones hear? They heard and recorded discussions about murder, contract hits, past and future. There was a 1981 rub-out of Angelo Patrizzi, found in a wrapped package in the trunk of his car in a Lynn parking lot. There was talk of two old murders, Tash Bratzos and Tommy DePrisco, who were gunned down in their Cadillac. The police found over $30,000 in the car, supposedly bail money, raised for jailed mafia songbird Joe Barboza Barron. And there was the hit on the Baron himself. By the mid-70s, the former mob assassin had already testified against his former employers and was living in hiding in San Francisco. He was neither hidden well enough nor mourned when he was rubbed out.
You made some comment yesterday about him not being any great loss to society. What was that?
Well, he killed 26 people that he told me about.
And there was talk on the Prince Street bug of two other planned but aborted contract hits. According to our sources, the talk was as blunt as could be. And what will today's indictments mean? Plenty, says the man who should know.
And for the government to put the leadership structure of the mob in Boston, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in New Orleans, in Tampa, in Philadelphia, in New York City, constantly on trial, in groups, not just one by one, but in groups, as an effective organization, it will be at an end.
There is, however, another key element of the RICO statute which the strike force is apparently not going to utilize fully. It's the so-called forfeiture clause in the statute, which allows the government to seize any property obtained through criminal family enterprise. Gennaro Angiulo's house in the Haunt would fit in that category, and so would the homes and businesses owned by the others who were indicted today. Among the other Angiulo family holdings, Donato's house in Medford, part of a two-home complex established in the 40s by the late patriarch of the Angiulo family, Cesar Angiulo. This is the property in Revere occupied by the ailing Nicola Nicky Angiulo, Jerry's older brother and the alleged consigliere or counselor to the Boston mob. We've learned that the family holdings have been often disguised, and many in the past year have changed hands to Federal Investments, Inc., for example, since the mob learned of the wiretaps. But we've learned that the family will hold on to just about all of its legitimate investments, including a block of Edison stock, that the government will only attempt to seize a few parcels of property, Prince Street offices, and perhaps one restaurant on Hanover Street.
If they don't begin to make that additional effort to reach out and to sterilize the dirty money so that the assets are taken away from the organization, they simply will not have followed through.
But they, the government, took an extraordinary first step today, and the regeneration of the Boston mob won't occur quickly or easily if Angiulo and his top lieutenants are jailed. That's a big if, one that depends on whether the conversations recorded in this office are as solid and incriminating as has been suggested. If they are, then the reign of the man who ran the office and whose family home has become a synonym for the fruits of underworld control could be over. Jerry Angiulo is front page news again. For the Newsbreakers team, I'm Mike Taibbi, News 7.
I'm Susan Burke, live in the North End, and tonight, reaction to today's arrests here is at best guarded. This tight-knit Italian community of no more than 40 square blocks in the downtown area shuns negative publicity, particularly when it's about one of their own. They don't always trust outsiders, and today they were not saying much. Any comment on this morning's arrests? What do you think about them?
Oh, nothing. No comment.
Oh, Jesus, I have no comment on that.
You all have any thoughts on this morning's arrests down here? How come, why am I getting that kind of reaction down here?
Because you're barking up the wrong tree. No one's going to talk here.
Why is that?
It's a traditional Italian attitude of keeping your mouth shut. That goes back for several hundred years if you have an Italian background.
Father Alphonse has been teaching in the North End for 3 years now. He's come to understand this community and the role the Angiulos play here.
What people have told me, they're good to have around.
Why?
It's the old Robin Hood principle, you know? There are some people who supposedly are evil who will protect the good when necessary.
On the level of help and protection, North End residents were willing to talk about the Angiulos.
To me, I mean, they were always well-mannered people and they helped people. That I know for a fact because they've helped me.
They don't bother nobody, they help everybody, and I don't think they should be harassed the way they are being harassed.
At least in this community, few people are willing to tie the Angiulos to organized crime.
Mafia? What's that? That's only in the movie.
I believe that line has been used before, and I think it was in a congressional hearing on organized crime. It also may not be accurate if the 20-count indictment issued today produces convictions. Live in the North End, I'm Susan Burke. Now back to you, Tom.